What's up, everybody? It's Wednesday. You know what that means. You're tuned into another episode of the co-main event Patreon live chat. I'm Chad. That's Ben. You are the beloved patrons of the co-main event. We're going to spend the next hour and change taking your questions, comments, and concerns from over on the Patreon page. We are indebted as ever to everyone who stopped by to put those in there in the comments section. We couldn't do it without you. We would literally have no content. Ben Folks, what's up? How you doing?
You know what I was just doing before I got on here? You
Uh,
don't know, so I'm just going to tell you.
styling your
Uh,
hair,
I'm going to ignore that comment. Uh,
flexing in the mirror.
I regret this whole. I was writing up my Twitter mailbag column, and I got a question from the homie Ryan Harkness about what was my favorite freak show fight of all time, both
Mm,
in terms of concept and execution. And this, Chad, naturally led me to going back and rewatching Bob Sapp versus Big Nog.
okay.
And man, it's still if somehow anyone in the CME listening audience has not gone back to watch that one, you got to, because it still holds up for being absolutely fucking ridiculous. And it captures, I think, what is the essence of the freak show fight, which is that as you are watching it, there are several points where you cannot help but feeling like this should not be allowed. This is a thing that should not be. It should not have existed, and yet it did. It's like 150-pound weight difference between them. I remember doing a story about Pride years later after its demise, I think like a decade after it had shut down, and going back and talking to a lot of people. And I talked to Josh Barnett, who had trained Bob Sapp for that one. And he and several other people were like, hey, whatever else the rest of Bob Sapp's career became, he actually trained for this one. He really wanted to win this one. And Josh Barnett was like, we built his game plan around the pile driver. We were like, this is a move Bob can pull off. Nogueira's gonna shoot. You're gonna end up in a position to pull it off. Here's one of the rare places where the rules will not prohibit you from trying to kill a man with a pile driver. Let's pull that one off. And in the first minute of the fight, he goes for the pile driver and nearly paralyzes Nogueira. And man, you go back and you watch that one. You also, this is the part I forgot until I went back and watched it. Among the commentary team, you got Bill Goldberg sitting there openly rooting for Bob Sapp. Like he's in there going, come on, Bobby. Bobby, come on. You got to relax and breathe in there, Bobby. It's the whole thing is just incredible. The lights in the arena seem to go out at one point. Guys just keep fighting. It's a wild ride. It's right there on YouTube too. The whole thing, 20 minutes of your life, and I'm telling you, you will not regret it.
I mean, you're making an incredible case for it right now. I got to agree with you. That's probably the great one, the greatest one.
All right, you want to know who's first this week?
Who's first?
Luke Edwards.
Okay.
Luke.
Congratulations to Luke. Once again, not the first email that we received, but
Well,
we're going to roll with it. Let's just roll with it.
he rolls in here and says, "Fuck that lefty headlock. You're taking everything I worked for, motherfucker." Then he goes on to say, in BJJ, there is an unofficial formula that us older grapplers tell ourselves that while getting absolutely fucked up by younger and or bigger opponents, every 10 years or 20 pounds that you give up to your opponent is the equivalent of a belt rank. With this in mind, can we use this system for the upcoming Paul versus Tyson fight? I know boxing doesn't have belts, but Tyson would be a black belt for sure. What would Paul be? He's beaten several fighters who I thought would smoke him, but I just can't see Paul as a black belt. So where would you put him? The weight appears to be close between both fighters, but there's about 30 years between them, so that's 3 belt ranks. If Paul is blue, then we got 2 black belts competing against each other. If Paul is purple or even brown, then gentlemen, I suggest we start to build a wall around our cold, dead hearts. Love to everyone, XXX.
Boy, that's
Um,
a tough question, right? First of all, yeah, dude, you better have the wall cemented in firmly at this point. I hope you put up bricks with some fucking good quality mortar, and then I hope you poured concrete all over that fucker just to reinforce it. This is an interesting question though, because of quality of opponent, right? And overall experience. Like I know you have to take into account Tyson's age, weight difference, everything else. But like if you considered them independently, Tyson at one point would have been almost akin to the Hickson Gracie of this shit, right? Like he would be one of the highest level black belt heavyweight boxers that we have ever seen. And Jake Paul, not so much, right? So like all things being equal, if they were both considered in a vacuum, like Mike Tyson would be whatever it is, like he'd be the red belt from the fucking David Mamet movie, and Jake Paul would probably be like a blue belt or some shit, right?
Yeah, Jake Paul, I think, would either be a high-level blue belt or a guy who just got promoted to purple. And it's hard to really assess Jake Paul as a boxer because isn't so much of our feeling about him that we don't think he could possibly be good. And then he keeps being better than we thought. And that, I think, makes it sometimes too easy to think that he's better than he actually is. Because our expectations from the get-go have been extremely low for this guy.
Correct.
And he's also done such a good job of trolling us constantly. And we know he's doing it. And yet we keep playing right into it. And all of that messes with our perception of how good he might actually be. Because I think he's solid overall as a pro boxer. I don't think he's great. But then the question is, how good do you need to be to beat a nearly 60-year-old Mike Tyson who, Chad, I hate to keep dwelling on this, was defecating tar just a few months ago? I don't think you need to be an elite boxer to beat that guy. Now, I saw some of the clips of Tyson out there working the mitts with Rafael Cordero in the media stuff for this fight this week, and he doesn't look. Some of the stuff where they're doing working mitts, I was like, "What is this the first time you guys have done this? I thought you guys were working together, presumably to prepare for this fight." But then when he starts doing his stuff, you're like, he's still got a little bit of Tyson pop.
He does, yeah.
He's got that explosiveness. When he gets in there and gets in there close, he can still move the head and come with an uppercut that will fucking decapitate you if it catches you. Now, I would think Jake Paul has a game plan that is jab, move, stay on the outside, and the minute this guy gets close to you, grab him and hold on. That's basically what we saw Roy Jones do. And if I'm Jake Paul, I'm just trying to survive those first couple rounds. There's only 2-minute rounds in this one. But
oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. But I'm just trying to let him tire himself out, move him around a little bit, and don't give him any free shots at me. And I think Jake Paul is smart enough that he knows that's what he should do. But I also think that, Tyson, he could catch you. He still has that ability. I just think you will see that ability fade away before your very eyes if it goes longer than 2 rounds.
That could well be. Yeah, that could well be. I'm going to make sort of the same case for why we shouldn't necessarily be impressed with Jake Paul's boxing ability as I would make about Dana White posting the shirtless pics, right? Jake Paul has
got to do.
Yeah, Jake Paul is rich and he ain't got shit else to do, right? Like he should be able to afford the best possible boxing training. He should be able to afford the best possible strength and conditioning, and he should be able to devote as many hours every day as he possibly can physically stand or that he wants to devote to it. And Jake Paul is clearly a pretty good athlete, right? We've seen that over the course of this, boxing career, that he's probably, an above average athlete. He probably would have been a pretty good high school football player. You know what I mean? And he also hasn't fought anywhere where you might consider there to be stringent drug testing.
Okay.
At least not since he fought Nate Robinson in California back in his second boxing match. So, Jake Paul should have all of the advantages necessary to be. He's not exactly walking in off the streets of Brooklyn to fucking Gleason's gym after he spent the day working as a pipe fitter and spending a couple hours working the heavy bag before he has to go home to his wife and 3 kids, right? That ain't Jake Paul's boxing lifestyle. So he should be fucking good, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would still run up against physical limitations, and I think that it's hard for people to admit that he might actually have some physical athletic gifts because you don't want him to. He seems like an asshole, you know? But yeah, I agree with what you're saying there in terms of just like, it's if he decides this is something he wants to do, he has the resources to do the best possible job that his body and ability will allow for. But honestly, I do think I'll still deserve some credit for the fact that he really has decided he wants to do it. We've seen plenty of other influencer boxer types where they don't really want to do this. They want to
Right.
do it once or twice for the money, for the attention. That it's a thing they can do. It's a way to monetize the type of fame that they've managed to achieve. But it's not something they really want to be and something
Sure.
that they really want to dedicate themselves to. And he has. Like,
Yeah.
it's been
No,
years of this
you
shit
can't
now.
you can't fault the dedication, right?
Curse Diamond says, "How's it going? So everyone I know who knows I watch fights wants to talk about Tyson Paul. And a lot of them are going to be watching it too. From construction workers to soccer moms, they remember the idea of Mike Tyson growing up and they're in. This is easily the biggest combat sports event of the year, but offhand, I'm struggling to remember the last time any fight has been this big. Help me out, please, and complete the sentence. This fucking freak show is the biggest fight since blank." Now, one of the things that makes this one so potentially widespread in its reach is the fact that it is airing for free on Netflix,
Yeah.
which I think Netflix is one of those that people have or people have had at some point where you could go in and reactivate the subscription fairly easy. You know, it's not like Peacock. It's not like Paramount Plus. Those are the ones that are sort of like tertiary streaming services to the point where even when there's something I really want to see on there, you have to get over my barrier of, fuck, I don't want to sign up for another thing. You know? Netflix and Amazon Prime, those are kind of the two where it's like, you got them. You've got them now, or you've had them at some point. You just push the button, make it go on again. You know where it is and how to find it. And so it feels free. It feels like free TV. It's not pay per view. You don't have that as a barrier to entry. And you get such an interesting mix of appeals with this across such a wide swath of humanity. Because you've got the people who remember Mike Tyson, who he was in the 90s, and just the cultural force that he was. You got people who only know Mike Tyson because he was in the fucking Hangover, and just because he's been a guy who's just sort of like in the culture for a long time. And you got the other people, much younger people mostly, who know Jake Paul. Remember him as a Disney kid or YouTuber or whatever, and they've got some feelings about one or both of these guys. And so many people that I talk to, and I know that you talk to, it's like they think Mike Tyson has been frozen in the ice like a goddamn caveman all this
Yeah.
time.
He's Han Solo up in the carbonite.
Yeah, that we're just going to thaw him out, and Mike Tyson from 1994 is going to walk out here and murder this kid. And sure, you want to see that on the streaming service. And the expectations of the casuals I feel are wildly off base for what the rest of us know is the more likely reality. But just because you've got this blend of like emotional reactions that this pairing can evoke in so many different people across so many different demographics and age ranges, that makes it pretty fucking huge, doesn't it?
It does. And it's almost like a return to the days that Dana White is always pining for when boxing was on cable television, right? Or like network broadcast television. Not exactly, right? Because you do have to pay a subscription to get Netflix. But at the same time, Netflix is as close to ubiquitously subscribed to streaming service as we have, right?
Yeah.
Almost everybody has Netflix. And so that alone makes this a tremendously big fight. I couldn't sit here and tell you it's the biggest fight since what exactly, because I can't claim to have like an encyclopedic knowledge of like what has been big boxing matches in the last handful of years. But to me, this,
And even those though, the pay-per-view,
right,
you know, getting people to pay $50 or more is such an obstacle.
right. More people are probably going to watch this than have watched maybe any pay-per-view ever,
Yeah.
maybe by a long shot, just in terms of societal and media penetration. I guess I can't speak to society, but maybe I'm just out of the loop and too far inside the bubble to not know the mainstream appeal. But this doesn't feel like it has gotten as much pre-fight hype to me as Mayweather versus McGregor.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. But that one also did cost $100 fucking.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that way more people are going to watch Jake Paul and Mike Tyson than have watched any other combat sports match in recent memory, and maybe of all time, short of like the millions who tune in to watch ONE FC every week.
All right. Trey Rhymes with Hey says, "Hey fellas, I think the Jon Jones gas hands discourse has been vastly overcomplicated. In my opinion, it boils down to something very simple. Jon wants his legacy to be that he fought in 2 weight classes and was never beaten. Absolutely nobody credits his one loss, it's in quotes, so beating an aged Stipe is the easiest path to keeping his name in the GOAT discussion for years to come. If we know anything about Jon, it's that he absolutely cannot handle the idea that people might not be talking about what a badass he is. So even the Poeton discussion feeds into that, since I'm sure Jones assumes he'll do to him what he did to Gon. Also, nothing would give me more pleasure than Stipe bonking Jon with the old bungalow and sending him into the land of wind and ghosts. I'm giddy just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Unlikely? Absolutely. One can still dream, though. LYBET.
I mean, this is basically a situation where Jon Jones tacitly admits that this is true, right? Because it is so inherent in the argument that he is making against him fighting Tom Aspinall. Because for him to say that Tom Aspinall doesn't really have the profile in the sport and hasn't done enough to deserve a fight with Jon Jones is sort of an admission that he could lose to Tom Aspinall, right? And he continually refers to it as a risk. Now, I'm sure Jon Jones would publicly say that about any fight, that taking any fight is a risk. But if he thought he was going to go in there and steamroll Tom Aspinall the same way that he has steamrolled Cyril Gahn, the way that we probably expect him to steamroll Stipe Miocic, he would probably be more game for it, right? But the odds on this fight just came out this week, and he would be an underdog to Tom Aspinall. And so, I think this is a thing where Jon Jones doesn't realize that he is sort of publicly acknowledging that when he talks about why he doesn't want this fight.
Do you credit at all my hypothesis, which I'm not even sure I believe, that it is mostly a negotiating strategy? That he knows if the fans want it enough, and if they think that Jon Jones is ducking it enough, that the UFC might have an incentive to give him more money to stay and fight Tom Aspinall and fulfill that desire, scratch that itch. That he's creating a demand by not just saying like, sure, I'll do that next, I'll do whatever. Like giving the UFC a reason to make him say yes.
That could be, I suppose. I mean, we saw Jon make what at least the UFC considered to be outlandish demands in order to get the Francis Ngannou fight. But then when Francis left to go to the PFL, ultimately, Jon signed a long-term deal pretty quickly. And maybe he got everything that he was asking for, but it certainly didn't seem like a situation where he had driven a particularly hard bargain for the UFC. So I don't even know if he would have the opportunity to renegotiate for a potential Tom Aspinall fight. Because
he could just say, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And maybe they would throw a ton of money at him, or maybe, if they're willing to pass on Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou, like clearly they would be willing to pass on Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall if Jones wanted too much money. I mean, I guess all I'm saying is that when he talks about the Tom Aspinall fight, he seems to acknowledge that it would be a risk because he might lose. And also, he is the UFC heavyweight champion, man. And he is not exactly out here saying, bring them all on. I will fight any of these contending ass heavyweights, right? He is saying the opposite of that, which is something that could impact Jon Jones's legacy, perhaps in a way that he doesn't fully understand.
Yeah. Um, a lot of questions on Jon Jones' legacy this week, but first I'm going to go to this one from McGregor's dealer. It says, "Look, personally, I like Ben and Chad."
Oh
Oh.
no. Oh no. There's a but coming, isn't there?
I've heard clips from that little show they do, and they seem like funny guys. And I'm never going to be one of those people who talk shit on the internet. But can we stop with this whole "we've never seen anyone beat Jon Jones" narrative? His DQ loss against Matt Hamill wasn't, as Dana White would have you believe, a mistake by the incompetent Steve Mazzagatti. It was a rare case of a referee actually doing their job. Hamill couldn't continue after the blatantly illegal strike by Jones. Any decision other than a DQ would have been bad officiating. Then there's the whole, yeah, it's a loss on paper, but we've never seen Jones truly bested argument. Except for two of the three judges at cage side, virtually everyone recognizes that Dominic Reyes should have won that fight. It was a win on paper for Jones, but in practice, he was bested by Reyes. Both on paper and in practice, Jon Jones has been beaten. So can we please stop saying that we've never seen anyone defeat Jon Jones? It detracts from the accomplishments of fighters who are actually undefeated, like Sean O'Malley.
My wife, I wasn't going to mention this because I didn't want to sidetrack the live chat too much, but my wife has recently become more active on social media. She
Oh, really?
recently signed up for Instagram. I don't think she has posted anything yet, maybe like one post, but primarily what she is on there for is to look at the Instagram feeds that are like cheap real estate in Scandinavia kind of a thing. But while we were recording this live chat, she sent me a text that said, "Answer a question for me. What is shit posting?"
Okay.
So
She's just going to catch up on like 15 years of internet?
yeah. So I had to send her a text back to explain shit posting. And is it possible that that's what McGregor's dealer is doing here?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I have to I got beef with McGregor's dealer because, as far as we know, McGregor's dealer did not show up to the Dublin pub meetup, even
Oh,
though every single person who walked in, we were like, "Are you actually McGregor's dealer?" And no one would cop to it. And so, if McGregor's dealer did not come through, or if McGregor's dealer did come through and wouldn't tell us he was McGregor's dealer, either way, we got beef. But I do feel like this is trying to wind us up a little
yeah.
bit. I mean, I get okay. I do feel weird though when I hear people start talking about overturning Jon Jones's DQ loss to
Yeah.
Matt Hamill,
Yeah.
because for one thing, just because you change the rule now doesn't mean that you there's amnesty for people who broke the rule when they knew it was a rule and when it had been a rule for years before and years afterwards. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, that we would go back and take away this disqualification just because you did something that was illegal then but that years later was made legal. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. I think it's a stupid rule. I think it was always a stupid rule, but it was in there. And I also think the the difficulty with that rule, one of the reasons why it's a dumb rule, is I remember writing a thing on this, and they were talking about how it it applies so rigidly. It has to be perfectly straight up and straight down. If there's any arc whatsoever to that elbow, then it's not a 12 to 6 elbow. And you could almost look at any single elbow and be like, no, wait, that one's 11:59 to, 5:29. Like, you could always sort of do that.
Right.
And yet, when he made that call at the time, first of all, Matt Hamill was getting his ass beat.
Yeah.
And that elbow did not make the difference. Like,
Didn't he also, well, like, wasn't one of the main deals that he like separated his shoulder on
yeah,
the
Jon
takedown?
Jones did like a trip takedown on him and threw him right on his shoulder, and he separated his shoulder. And that elbow did seem to smash his nose and like slice open a gnarly cut on his nose, but also like he was just getting beat the fuck down to the point where before he threw that elbow, Jon Jones was looking up at Mazzagatti like, "Are you seeing this? Are you seeing the way I am beating this man's ass?" And kind of threw the elbow because he had hit him with everything else, and Mazzagatti wasn't stopping it. But still, it's like when you every time we've seen somebody challenge the result of a fight in front of an athletic commission like Nevada, they always remind you that there are only a couple ways that you can overturn a result. One is if you can prove some kind of corruption, and two is if you can prove that the referee misapplied the rules. Like, if it's a judgment call, you can't overturn it. And it's also hard to ignore that we're only given a shit because it's Jon Jones
Right.
and because his record would be perfect otherwise. And the UFC would like to be able to promote him as undefeated without having to have like an asterisk next to it. And so it's in their interest to want to do it. But it's like if it were just some random guy who's just like, I lost this fight and it was my third loss and I don't believe it should be on there. I think I should be 11-2 rather than 10-3. And nobody would care. Everybody would be like, fucking boo-hoo, you know? It's only Jon Jones that you care. And as for the Dominic Reyes one, it's like I get it. We can always do this where like, okay, yeah, he won this fight, but he shouldn't have. I don't think he deserved to, but he did.
Yeah.
Like that's all you can really do. I did want to point out though, the big homie Chuck Mindenhall has something today on the Uncrowned about Jon Jones and talks to a lot of former opponents of Jon Jones, and Brandon Gibson gets a lot of quotes in there, which I enjoy. But I think the only quote from quotes from Vladimir Matyushenko, from Glover Teixeira, all this stuff. The only quote in here from Dominic Reyes, I'm going to read it to you. Quote: "The most difficult thing was dealing with his reach and him constantly trying to eye poke me. Go back and watch the tape."
Have you seen, I don't know, maybe we got a question about the gloves.
Yes, we do.
Okay, I'll save it then. But I agree with you. The weirdest part about the Jon Jones loss is the UFC and Dana White's insistence on having it overturned, right?
Yeah.
And then, like you said with Dominic Reyes, man, you could go back and you could find a million fighters who had won decisions that they were supposed to, that they
Yeah.
probably should have lost. And we don't necessarily frequently bring that up in terms of legacy, and unless it becomes a real, recurring thing. But I'm just going to say again, Jon Jones's most underwhelming performances at light heavyweight are clearly the first fight against Alexander Gustafsson, and then the fight against Dominic Reyes and the fight against Thiago Santos, right? And those are all fights where Jon Jones did not enjoy a significant size advantage, which is one of the reasons why I continue to say we haven't seen that much of him at heavyweight, and let's wait until he runs up against some adversity against an opponent who is as big or bigger than him. That's off topic. Just wanted to say it.
On the topic of the gloves, Hair Danny Boy III says, "Hi, gents. UFC told its fighters it was going back to the old gloves for UFC 309. One, why is that? And two, how excited do you think Jon Jones got when he found out he can now eye poke and 12-6 elbow his way to victory? Cheers." Now, the thing about the new gloves is I don't really think that there's much indication that they stop eye pokes. And that you remember, I was at the shit at UFC 300 when they rolled out the new gloves, and we're talking all about the research they had done and the design and everything. They passed them around. You can absolutely still extend your fingers in those bad boys, no problem. I did it. I put them on, and I did. First thing I did, Chad, was just fling, like I'm fucking Wolverine, and it was no problem at all. And when I raised my question, asked the guy, "What about the eye pokes?" He was like, "Yeah, we weren't really trying to design anything to do about it." So it's like they never. That was not what they were trying to do with the new gloves at all. That was what the rest of us assumed and wanted them to do. So I don't know if that's going to make a big difference. It is weird though. To like, I have not yet heard any reasoning behind that. Like, is it that the New York Commission won't approve new gloves? Is it that the UFC themselves kind of, for one reason or another, felt unhappy with the new gloves? I don't know. I have no idea what is up with that, but it does seem it's one of those things that makes you go, you know?
I hope somebody asks about it. I'm sure they will this week, right? Because I don't know why they would make the switch. It is hilarious that they redesigned the gloves and did not address the one structural change that would probably be considered the biggest flaw in the existing glove design.
Joe Rogan been talking about it for 10 years.
Yeah. And it is also fun to talk about how this Jon Jones is going to poke Stipe in the eye a bunch of times because of the old gloves. But we'll see what happens, man. I don't know. I mean, if he does go out there and poke Stipe in the eye a bunch of times, people are definitely going to talk about it.
I'm just saying, I think he would have done that regardless.
Yeah, that's probably true. But this just gives another arrow in the quiver.
Yeah. Sean Strickland's irrelevant life coach says, "The last time I wrote something critical of Jon Jones, Chad threw me a verbal beating. But since I don't learn my lesson, and both Chad and Ben have since made all the same points, I'm going to circle back to what I brought up last year. Jon Jones set a brilliant legacy for himself in his early light heavyweight years, but that brilliance ended 5 years ago when he lost 2 points for kneeing Anthony Smith in the head in their fight. He should have been DQ'd, full stop. Then he'd have 2 losses by DQ and might still have gone on to lose decisions to both Thiago Santos and Dominic Reyes before he took 3 years off while Francis was heavyweight champ. Granted, Smith continued and the judges gave him those W's, but I watched those fights and disagreed with those decisions as many of us did. I also watched him ringside when he raked the eyes of Glover Teixeira over and over and should have been DQ'd. So if this man thinks his legacy doesn't include those events as well as a refusal to fight Aspinall, I'm here to say that I'm not alone, and many of us will remember the details, not just the green and red of his Tapology page. He's also been stripped of exactly as many titles as he's won, and beat his wife after getting a Hall of Fame induction, crashed his car into a pregnant woman before running away, and fired off his pistol from his car while drinking. And those are just the moments we heard about. All this to say, I won't be gaslit by this man when he tweets about his legacy, but he and I agree on this. He has crafted a legacy that speaks for itself one step at a time. I just don't think he realizes that some of us remember all the details. The question is, in my best Walter Sobchak voice, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Sincerely, Sean Strickland's irrelevant life coach.
I don't necessarily think that you're wrong. And in fact, laid out in this fashion, this is fairly compelling in terms of an argument. But we have to acknowledge that we are doing the thing.
Yeah.
Right? We are doing the capital T, the thing right now. And I don't mean the monster movie about the Antarctic or whatever. Like, you can do this to any fighter, right? You could do this to Habib if you wanted to. You could do this to George St. Pierre. Maybe not with as many examples as you can do for Jon Jones. And look, I've said all the way along that you've had diminishing returns with Jon Jones, right? That his last handful of performances hasn't been anything approaching the dominance that he showed in his first handful of performances at light heavyweight. And the fact is that he won almost all of those early fights against people that, again, he enjoyed tremendous physical advantages over. If you see Randy Couture and Rashad Evans in person, and then you see Jon Jones, those dudes should not be fighting in the same weight class. And then when dudes started to get bigger, he got a little bit less dominant. But I don't think you can just completely undercut the guy's legacy entirely, right? We know that he's a shit person, but a great fighter. But he's not alone in that by a long shot. Although I do admit, props out to Sean Strickland's irrelevant life coach. This is a compelling argument that you've laid out here, sir. Please direct it to Jon Jones because I would like to hear his response.
One of the ways, though, that I think where the Venn diagram between Jon Jones' personal life and Jon Jones, the fighter, professional life, where they meet is in the ways that his personal problems and many, many missteps have affected his career. Because being stripped of titles, it's the only way he's lost any titles, basically. And the one of the feelings I think that we would have if Jon Jones won this fight against Stipe and then really did call it a career, and in what I maintain is absolutely not going to happen, stayed retired, is there would be a sense that he left some stuff on the table, that he didn't give us everything he possibly could. He didn't find out what the absolute limits of his own greatness were because of some of his personal shit. You know, when he was supposed to fight Anthony Johnson, hit the pregnant lady with the car. Times where it just didn't seem like he was taking it seriously. Times where it didn't seem like he was really just giving us as good a stuff as he could give us. And times where, you know, he's away for a few years for this reason, that reason, losing titles because of his personal behavior, like all that kind of stuff. I do think it has to factor into the legacy because it's not as if it was kept completely separate from his career as a fighter. It reached in and affected his career as a fighter several times. So I do think you have to consider that. Ditch Crew says Jones is a minus 700 favorite ahead of this fight with Stipe. Charles Oliveira is a minus 300 favorite over Michael Chandler. Bo Nicol is a minus 800 favorite over veteran Paul Craig. How can this be marketed as the pay-per-view of the year with this kind of disparity at the top of the card? First of all, I'll say, who is saying pay-per-view of the year? Other than maybe the UFC. Because UFC 300 was the pay-per-view of the year.
Yeah.
You're not going to beat that, man. Just in terms of not only the lineup that they had, but the way it fucking delivered. Just all the way through, that one delivered. Amazing, memorable moments. The best single fight card I've ever attended in person, probably ever seen, whether TV or in person at all. Like, you're not going to beat that with, two good fights on the top of the card and then a few other names we know on the other card. Like, there's just because it's happening in Madison Square Garden, just because it includes Jon Jones, that's not enough to beat UFC 300. It's not even close.
Yeah. Well, don't make me repeat what Ant Evans said to me once, and that is when you're a fight promoter, the biggest show you've ever done is always the next one.
Yeah.
And look, man, these are they on paper are mismatches, right? And I mean, especially Jon Jones versus Stipe, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler, arguably a little bit closer, but Charles Oliveira is probably the rightful favorite. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be excited to see him, right? Well, this doesn't necessarily totally obliterate my excitement to see him. Like, we've acknowledged the entire time that Jon Jones will almost certainly beat an aging and inactive Stipe Miocic. But I continue to say, but what if he doesn't, though? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
What this question presupposes is.
Yeah, what if he doesn't, though? So I don't know. I still want to watch. I still want to see what happens, and maybe Stipe will not deliver on this, but what if we get to round 3? Where are we at then? That's what I want to see. Where are we at if Stipe punches Jon Jones in the face as hard as he can?
Yeah, that is the question for me. Because the rest of the stuff, I feel like Jon Jones is faster. I feel like Jon Jones has more weapons that he can threaten Stipe with than Stipe has to threaten him with. But if he gets clipped, if he gets hit one good time by Stipe, does it feel like a different fight after that? That's the part I want to see.
What if he can't take him down? Yeah. What if he tries to take him down and he can't? There's just a lot of questions for me. That's all I'm saying. Plus 525 underdog for Stipe Miocic or not. I want to see some of my questions answered.
There's an interesting one from Sunny Weathers. It says, finally, I bring an MMA question to the live chat. If the UFC goes to Netflix or some other non-ESPN service, does ESPN begin ignoring the UFC again? Until late in the Fox era, when it became clear ESPN had a chance to get them, they rarely covered anything UFC. If there was a crazy finish, it might make SportsCenter top 10, but I only heard anything about UFC from websites and message boards. Also, if ESPN did do that, do you think it would hurt the UFC's business? Shit-eating wild men would still seek it out, but for most bitch-ass casuals, if they don't see it on SportsCenter, it might as well not exist. And would ABC be spiteful enough to blackball them, or just the threat of it to keep UFC around, at least with pay-per-view or specials? That is interesting because those of us who have been following the sport a long time definitely remember when ESPN treated the UFC like it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And for a long time. I remember this is a whole different age of the internet when you would even think to do something like this. I emailed like the customer service email through the ESPN.com and was just like, why don't you guys show any MMA? Why don't you guys cover the UFC or any MMA stuff? They emailed me back, Chad. Mm-hmm. You know what their email said?
Oh, I remember clearly, but tell all the kids at home.
They were like, we do cover martial arts stuff. We've got board breaking demos. And they told me like what time it was coming on. Like I was like, they're like, oh yeah, no, we've got some coming up. Tuesday at 3 a.m. There's a board breaking shit. And we have some old K1 fights that will air sometimes. And, the thing where like people are flipping around with katanas and shit on like a stage at a conference hall somewhere. Like that's what they told me. As if they were like, oh no, see, this just is a misunderstanding. You think we don't have this stuff. We actually do. Yeah. And I was going to be like, oh, sorry guys, my mistake. Fuck you.
I think it's an interesting question for sure. I think that there's no doubt that the UFC has benefited, among other things, from just being a thing that is on television in bars now. Yeah. Right? Because if you're on ESPN, you go down to your local watering hole, on one TV on a Saturday night, you got Tulane against Mississippi State. And on the other TV, maybe you got two random guys fighting in the UFC. And that sort of puts those two things on equal footing. If you are just a bitch ass casual, sipping on soda pops down at your bar. Although the UFC is mostly on ESPN Plus, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that they go sign a deal and those ESPN Plus shows are now just on Netflix. Does that hurt their business, or do more people end up watching it?
I do think there's something to being on ESPN Plus, a streaming service that I have found I might just open it up just if I'm in a mood to watch some live sports.
Yeah.
Not knowing anything specific that's on, not having an idea. I do it mainly for hockey because, on a weeknight at like 6 p.m., 7 p.m., I'm sitting down to eat dinner or whatever, and I want to have something on the TV. I can just flip it on and be like, who's playing? Somebody's playing, you know? And I'm sure you get at least some of that traffic having the UFC on and some people being like, oh, there's a fight on tonight? Some fight night shit I didn't know about? It's just there? Sure. I'll
Yeah.
check it out and see what you get. So I'm sure that's part of it. And Netflix is not necessarily a thing. At least now, the way you think of Netflix is I will open it up and I will either watch a next episode in one of the shows they got, a movie they got on there, a documentary about World War II, whatever. Like I'm not opening it up when I'm in a sports mindset. Now maybe that changes as
Yeah.
they start to get other stuff, but I do think that there's a difference, and that the UFC, I don't know, like we've talked before about how it seems the UFC has long ago left behind concerns about being in the growth phase of MMA, and they have been in the cash out phase.
Yeah.
Whatever's makes the most money, they are not concerned about converting new fans. They feel like we can just squeeze more and more out of the fans that we have, especially by shopping it to streaming services that that more and more see the value of live sports. And there's not a whole lot of great options available at any one time.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people open up Netflix and just aimlessly and eternally scroll through that, right? I know I do. I'm fucking constantly on Netflix going through all of my recommendations and critically acclaimed movies. And here are some shows you might like because you watched The Gentleman, produced by Guy Ritchie, right?
Yeah.
So you start doing that, and WWE and UFC are on there. Probably some people are going to watch those. Also, I'm just going to say for the record, I will be surprised if some UFC content does not remain on ESPN.
Yeah.
I think
I could see them breaking it up and everything, but at least like pay-per-views, I could see that staying on ESPN.
Yeah. I honestly think some stuff will stay on ESPN. I also will kind of be surprised if some UFC program doesn't wind up on Netflix. Just saying.
Neil in Oshawa says, I'm hopping on a plane Thursday and will be attending the Tyson Paul card on Friday.
Oh,
Why, you might
yeah.
ask? Not simply because I want to shore up my credentials as the shittiest of the shit-eating wild people, but mainly because my friend is fighting for a world title on the undercard, Melinda Watpool, a salt of the earth farm girl who the CME should get behind. You know what? Convinced.
Yeah.
We're Melinda Watpool fans right now. Any other co-maniacs going? With Tyson being the sympathetic figure in this whole production, I am wondering if there has been anyone more successful than him at convincing the public en masse to separate the art from the artist. Or do we all just view him as having been, quote, rehabilitated? And then adds in parentheses, a Shawshank quote, I know what you think it means, Sonny. Cheers, N. It is interesting that Tyson, somewhere in the last 20 years or so, went from being a guy who got our attention in part because he was terrifying and in part because we suspected, oh, here's the guy that has the power of a heavyweight pro athlete, but might actually snap and punch you in the face if you fuck around with him in public. And, done jail time for sexual assault, but also somehow managed to gradually become a sort of like lovable uncle figure in American life. That is kind of rare. And
Yeah.
it seems to have happened gradually, a little bit at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And it is super awkward a lot of the time, at least in my mind, to think that, we have afforded Mike Tyson that luxury. And frankly, we have afforded that luxury to a lot of other famous athletes and now the president of the United States. Uh, I'm going to say again, hashtag just saying, brothers and sisters, you can get into Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson for $66.
Yeah.
Now you'll be sitting at the tippy top of Cowboy Stadium, so I don't know what kind of view that's going to offer you, but you can get in. You can get in for less than $100. Ringside tickets, 13 hundo, which is about what you'd pay to like slip in the door for a nosebleed seat at the Sphere for the UFC.
Yeah. Here's one. I just have to read this just because it made me chuckle. Henpecked Hal says, I'm no Sir Nigel, but to me, one of the greatest challenges a thespian may face is playing the role of a mentally disabled character. As if the craft wasn't hard enough already, they must radically transform their speech and mannerisms in a way that realistically and respectfully captures the struggle of their character's condition. It's a gambit that few actors take, which is why performances like Billy Bob Thornton's depiction of Carl in Sling Blade and John Malkovich's portrayal of Lenny in Mice of Men are particularly memorable. As much as we like to poke fun at the Huntington Beach bad boy, I'd like to put some respect on his name for taking on this challenge in his latest film, 12 to Midnight. In it, Tito Ortiz plays Marco, who, according to IMDb, suffers from the rare condition of Southernism? Hold up. You're telling me that was a Southern accent? From the Southern United States of America? Are you fucking kidding me? And then links to this clip I'm sure you've seen, where see Tito Ortiz with some kind of Charles Bronson impersonator, and he's trying to do a Southern accent in the scene. And I again ask, how did anybody involved in the filming of this? How did they stand there, point the cameras at it, have the lights, the sound, and these people weren't just laughing, just openly laughing at him?
I can't believe
when
that
you're on a movie like this, right? Like you see Tito Ortiz doing his Southern accent, you're like, this is the most dog shit thing I've ever been a part of.
Yeah. I thought we were going to go for the Paul Walter Hauser character on Kingdom. I thought that's where we were headed with this, since Henpecked Hal and I exchanged some Instagram DMs about Paul Walter Hauser. He also promised that he would send us some information about some, I believe, video editing software or programs that we might be able to use. So I hope he still follows through on that. I was astounded by this Charles Bronson looking motherfucker who apparently has made a somewhat successful, albeit B movie career out of the fact that he looks exactly like Charles Bronson. And I mean, he looks exactly like Charles Bronson.
He does. I don't like it. It's too uncanny for me. Like when I saw it, I was like, what is happening here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Jack Weiss says, okay, I have kind of a hot take. I think Jon Jones is the first elite athlete to start training in MMA and fight in the UFC. He has two brothers who played in the NFL, and he was able to pull off high-level striking techniques that he only saw on the UFC video game, LYBE. Okay, if we want to get into like the question of first elite athlete, maybe, but I would say we've seen other people who are a high-level athlete, fucking Greg Hardy.
Yeah.
Greg Hardy was a very successful football player and then came over to fight in combat sports and sucked. He sucked. I think you see over the years, if you're around this sport, you see a few different types of fighter personality and fighter archetypes. And there are the guys where you get a sense this guy is a great enough athlete that he could kind of do a whole lot of stuff. I remember Greg Jackson saying to me about that he felt that some ways the friendship between Leonard Garcia and Donald Cowboy Cerrone was destructive for Garcia because he would think he could do what Cowboy did, which is train some of the time, not all the time. And he was like, Cowboy goes out skeet shooting. He's going to be the best skeet shooter you ever saw in a few weeks. He goes out wakeboarding. He's going to be a great wakeboarder before you know it. And most other guys are not like that. But I also think you've seen a lot of guys in MMA who, if you put them in stick and ball sports, would not really impress you at all. I've known a bunch of MMA fighters where I was like, if I played pickup basketball with this dude, I'd be all right. You know, it's a completely different kind of thing. And you see a lot of people who are great athletes in basketball, football, baseball, whatever, but fighting is such a different kind of thing, mentally, physically, all that stuff, that you have to be sort of made for that in a lot of other ways. And I think one of the things that Jon Jones has going for him is he has always had kind of just like a preternatural understanding of
Yeah.
it. That the fact that he can just see somebody do this stuff and then do it himself, that's not a common trait. And to be able to like understand what somebody else is doing in a fight and how to beat them right away, not see it on tape over time, figure it out later, to be able to do it in the moment in the fight. That's a really rare and specialized thing.
Yeah. It is kind of amazing to periodically reckon with the notion that Jon Jones is the smallest and maybe least athletic of his brothers, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that there's something to be said that he was a incredibly high level athlete that showed up in the UFC when maybe that wasn't as common, because he obviously he was there for years before a guy like Greg Hardy showed up. Because I remember when Jon Jones showed up and he started kind of whipping people's ass, I thought, oh, this is the kind of athlete we're getting now, where these guys are starting to show up here. And
And
the
it turned out it
trickle
was
has
mostly
been,
just him.
what's that?
It turned out it
Yeah,
was mostly just him.
yeah, I was gonna say the trickle turned out to be slower than I expected it to be. But you've got athletes now, like I've always said, showing up fighting in styles that we thought flat didn't work
Yeah.
when guys first started to do them. So it has improved a little bit, but I think it is true that Jon Jones was one of the better athletes and one of the better natural talents, frankly, that we have ever seen show up in the sport.
All right, we're about 50 minutes in. You know what time it is.
It's Tracy time.
Tracy Dickinson writes, I'm not sure if I should even admit this, but after watching some Embedded, I'm realizing that I've kind of missed Stipe. I've forgotten how much I enjoy his dry sense of humor and what an actually nice guy he seems to be, the polar opposite of his opponent. I'd put out of my mind how challenging it is to understand what he's saying sometimes without subtitles, but I do enjoy puzzles, so putting my mind to work trying to figure out what he's just said isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yay for brain health. I wish we were seeing him again under different circumstances, as in not being a gentleman of a certain age who hasn't fought in years and is expected to lose, but there may be one small chance that he won't make us sad. Apparently, Jon Jones took offense to Stipe calling him a bitch for some reason. Stipe seemed to genuinely apologize for it, but what if, right as the ref is finishing asking if they're ready, Stipe were to mouth, "You're a bitch," at Jon? Then, in the split second he's still seeing red, Stipe could try something like the Shara Bullet double spinning back fist and knock him out before he reacts. Put $20 you never want to see again on that, and if it hits, you're eating at Sizzler every day for life. Follow me for more financial advice. Can you imagine what it would actually feel like if Stipe went out there and knocked out Jon Jones? Would you qualify that as a feel-good experience for you personally?
I mean, because I would fucking gloat all over this shit. You will never hear the end of it if Stipe Miocic wins this fight. I will scrub from the entire history of this show all of the concessions that I have made about how Jon Jones will probably win, and I will only include all of the sound bites of me talking about how Stipe might do better than we think he's going to do, and I told you so. I'll be crowing from the rooftops if Stipe wins this fight. I will also say I have missed Stipe. I've always thought he was an engaging and somewhat likable character in the sport. If you don't find anything else out about his personal life.
What are you saying, like his political affiliations? Or
I'm saying I don't know, and I don't want to know.
you once referred to Stipe, to listening to Stipe talk in a post-fight interview, as bunch of lug nuts in a blender.
I stand by it.
That's a quote. That's a direct fucking quote. It has stuck in my mind for years.
I stand by it. That is what he sounds like.
All right. Some lightning round before we get out of here. Mr. JM asks, which Patreon tier would allow me to access a Discord channel that Ben uses? The ones I've been frequenting are quite Benless, LYBE, etc. Look, I'm telling you, there's a lot going on in the Discord. It's too, if you create a channel that's just for Ben,
okay. See,
where I can just talk to people,
this
and I don't
actually
get bogged
came up.
down,
This actually came up on the Discord. Somebody was like,
yeah,
maybe if we create a channel that's called Ben Folks.
do it.
I
Do
haven't
it.
said this out loud, but I'm going to say it now. You are giving this motherfucker exactly what he wants if you do that.
Fucking do it. Where am I supposed to go? I'm looking at my sumo chat, no spoilers, podcast specific comments, tips for the well-rounded fight fan, betting chat, $20 you don't want to see, Mount Zions. What the fuck is that? What is even on Mount Creamy Steve's War Room shit, general discussion, you're among friends, food and drink, pets, travel, I maked this, table games, health and fitness, Hell World Poetic, book club, book suggestions, movie club, music, podcast, movie discussion, TV shows, video games, other sports, hockey, football, basketball, baseball, rugby, slappity slap. Okay, who did that? Who created a slappity slap one?
We created a slap fight channel as an April Fool's Day joke.
Okay.
Here's the thing, man. You don't gotta go in all of those if you don't want to. Just go in the ones that you feel like appeal to your interests. And then if someone tags you in a comment in the slappity slap channel, then you can go in there and respond to it. Other than that, it's a a la carte buffet system, man. You don't got to take everything that's at the buffet. Just get what you want and stay in there.
Okay, see, though, when I try to go and like when it has a little like red thing telling me that somebody is like tagged me and I open that one up, but it doesn't take me right to that comment, so I don't know where it is.
You gotta scroll until you see it, and it'll be
See,
it'll have like a little shading on it,
that's bullshit.
so you'll know that that's where you were tagged. Here's the thing. It would be the biggest Ben Folks thing ever to happen if your own disinterest and arrogance leads to them creating a channel specifically for
Do
you,
it.
just to
Do it.
cater to you, to be like, oh, Ben, please come in here and talk to us.
Just simplify it for me. That's all I'm asking people to do. Just make it simple so that I can use it and I can understand what the hell is going on. Chris Rennie says, I've deleted Twitter and Instagram off my phone. Over the past 2 weeks, my screen time report dropped by hours per day. I can feel myself thinking more. This week, I unsubscribed from RMMA. That's the Reddit, the MMA subreddit. Going forward, the CME, its Discord, and associated properties will comprise my relationship with the sport. You son of a bitch, I'm in. See, this is probably the way to be. I just each day goes by and I think it gets harder and harder to justify some of my media usage, some of my phone usage, you know?
Yeah, I just joined Blue Sky,
Yeah, me too.
and my thing was like, oh, maybe if I get on Blue Sky and it works, then I will be able to like walk away from Twitter. But at this point, you know what I've done. I've just added an additional social media timeline. I will say Blue Sky is kind of delightful right now. It seems to me to be more intuitive and functional than Threads. And
Threads sucks, man. Threads just keeps serving me up a bunch of bullshit where I'm just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. And then the kind of like, so far, none of the horse shit of over on Twitter. But I still have Twitter. I'm still looking at it, but maybe we're starting to phase it out. That's what I keep telling myself, instead of being like, I'm going to eat both chocolate and vanilla ice cream now. I'm just telling myself maybe when the vanilla carton runs out, I won't buy another one.
The Jesse White Deer says, bless up, kings. In honor of Daddest Man on the Planet season, what's some general dad advice from each of you? What's some advice you remember that you received from your dad? Best wishes, warm regards, your pal and favorite cat dad from Oklahoma, the Jesse White Deer.
I don't know. The few times now that I've had to watch my boys. Actually, no. Here's what I'm going to say. Stop trying to solve all their problems. Okay. That is a real impulse that I have. Whenever they have a problem, I kind of want to solve it for them. You know, I want to give them advice on how to solve it. And honestly, generally, that's not what they're looking for, especially as they get older, right? Especially with my tween. Like if she and her boyfriend broke up, by the way.
Oh no!
Yeah,
I guess we're gonna hear about this tomorrow.
Talk about it tomorrow. Okay. She's homesick today, so got to keep the discourse limited. Okay. When if she brings a problem or is talking about a problem, kind of like the last thing she wants from me is either what she would view as a lecture or like a suggestion on what to do. Kind of like almost what they want / need more than that is just sort of like support, like a sympathetic ear and or, some words of encouragement, whatever, reinforcement of who they are and that you love them and stuff like that. I still struggle with that. And it's one of the things that has taken me a long time to learn.
As far as advice that I remember receiving from my dad, I remember when I was probably 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there. My dad was convinced he was going to die soon, mainly because he was reaching a milestone in age where men in his family had traditionally not lived past that. And I tried to point out to him, and have made this point several times in the more recent past when he's become convinced after reaching another milestone that men in his family don't make it past this point, that he's lived a much healthier life than they did. Growing up in the South, eating gravy and pork at every single meal, they were not doing themselves a whole lot of favors. And he's much more conscientious, much smarter about taking care of himself. And so I think he will live longer than he thinks. But I remember at one point wrote down a bunch of dad advice that he thought I might need, even if I didn't need it at that phase of my life. But he thought, like, hey, you might need this in the future, and I might not be around here to give it to you. So here it is that you can refer to. And I've thought about several things on that list often. One of the interesting things to me is that a lot of the list was broken up into different topics, like different categories. And even though one of the categories was specifically sports and advice about playing sports and life in sports and all that kind of stuff, every single category included some sports metaphors.
Of course. Yeah.
At the very least.
We should point out that your dad's social media handle is at Coach Folks.
Yeah.
Right.
He was a high school football coach for years before I was born. And so, yeah, sports was a big part of his life and a big part of our relationship and everything growing up and still. And some of the stuff I'll still find myself saying to my kids. Like one of them was, sometimes you got to play hurt. And that's a metaphor that can just apply in a whole bunch of different aspects where it's just like, yeah, a lot of the things you're doing that you got to do, the conditions are never going to be ideal or rarely going to be ideal. And you got to just do the best you can at the time anyway. The important thing is to go do it. Stuff like that. There's a whole lot of that kind of stuff on there that I've thought about a lot. And he continued to live for decades after that. So
yeah, he's still going. He just called me on the phone a few weeks ago. Do you still have the list?
I think I do actually still have the list somewhere.
Can you share it with the top tier, with the patrons? Can we put Ben Folks' dad's life advice out there for the $20 patrons?
I will have to find it, but I'll see what I can do.
Okay.
It's among my personal papers. Jules Christian asks, this one's for you, Chad. Hey, Chad, but is Bob Dylan whimsical? It's a tough one, isn't it? You don't want to admit that he's whimsical. That's what this is about.
Bob Dylan defies description. What do you think Bob Dylan would say if you asked him if he was whimsical?
Oh, he'd say something fucking inscrutable and Sphinx-like, because that's what he does.
Exactly. He'd probably say, get the fuck off my lawn, first of all. And then he would say some fucking insane shit. Maybe he's whimsical. I don't know. I still don't know that we have come up with a working definition of what whimsical means as applied to a persona.
I am reminded of one of my favorite quotes about Bob Dylan, which was, I believe, Steve Earle saying that Townes Van Zandt was the best songwriter in America, and he'd stand on Bob Dylan's coffee table and say so. And when asked about that quote, Townes Van Zandt replied, I've met Bob Dylan's bodyguards. You can't stand on his coffee table. We got a couple questions along this line, but I'll read this one from Red Chat Guy, who says, it's going to suck when Trump comes out to the arena on Saturday with a smirking Dana White beside him and Kid Rock playing while the arena cheers him on. I know watching the event isn't helping, but at least I won't be giving the UFC any money for it while I stream it. Now, Eric Pringnell says, hopefully Trump doesn't show up. He won now. He has no more need for the human filth, right? Brother, what he needs is the ego fulfillment of walking out and being cheered, right?
Yeah, he will walk into any room if people are going to clap and cheer, especially if it's thousands of people.
Yeah, and frankly, there are not that many pro sports environments he's been able to show up at and not get at least a little bit booed, right? Like we've seen him at other events. Like the UFC is the one place where he can show up and be treated as a hero. Just a couple more before we get out of here. Ryan Robinson, senior CME watch party host, says, I'm a little too busy this week to find a quote, but I got two things to say. First, thanks for reading most of my email to the proper on Monday, but you skipped my question. Should Rug try and parlay his new champ status to get the next MMA fight with Big Fran?
Oh,
Also,
shit. Sorry, I missed that because I gladly would have talked about that. I will
I know
pay
you
any
would.
amount of monies to see that.
Also, I've been chatting with the big homie Eric Prengnell, and we're going ahead with a CME mini meetup in Calgary this week to watch the fights at a pub. If you're in Cowtown, hit up Eric or I and let's get together. All the love to all the people and pets, and solidarity with all the American women who refuse to fuck while Trump is president.
The Canadian CME fans are getting together.
I love it.
I love it, and a little bit I fear it. What will happen when they consolidate so much power north of the border?
You're saying that we cannot allow the North to rise again?
Actually, all of you guys, I'm not going to say anything, but maybe keep a spare bedroom open. You know what I'm saying? Maybe you get some visitors who might want to stay a while.
Okay, Nikki Spliff says, I'm a non-binary bisexual person. I'm actually a little bit scared at how I'm going to exist in Trump's America. 2, I've been blessed. I thought I was going to watch Tyson get messed up on my birthday, but luckily some tar got in the way. What could possibly be next for Joe Rogan Paul? Now, and then Nikki Spliff also notes, I know that question ignores results, but I'm just going to go with the bad outcome for the bit. If we're right, if Jake Paul cruises in this fight, I see Jake Paul via decision as the most likely outcome.
Yeah.
And I had some people ask me, like, what could he do next that would possibly be bigger than this? And I feel like I'm not learning the lesson, and I'm doubting the guy who keeps surprising me over and over again. But I kind of think nothing. I kind of think this one is lightning in a bottle for a lot of those reasons we talked about earlier about the way these two personalities meld together and the way that they both together and separately evoke certain something in the audience, and then being on Netflix and Cowboy Stadium, and it manages to feel big.
Yeah. I mean, he will fight for some kind of made up and minor heavyweight title at some point. That's my prediction.
Yeah, that just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
All right. We will finish. We got a lot of good ones this week, so I'm sorry to all the ones that we didn't get to. But we got one here that I think is just an interesting thought experiment from JT. Any bets on what Stipe's go-to dish is when it's his turn to cook dinner for the boys at the fire station? I'm guessing it's something hearty, like a loaded baked potato bar. Either of you gents have a go-to recipe for when it's time to entertain and maybe impress company? LYBE. Now, my first reaction was to be like, Stipe feels like a guy who's going to make a big dish of lasagna.
Yeah, I was gonna say hot dish casserole of some kind, right?
Okay.
With the crunchy stuff on top of it.
Yeah, that ain't a bad bet. What would your move be? Especially, say the alternate universe where Chad Dundas becomes a firefighter and has to make dinner for the whole bunch of the guys. You know, you don't want to do anything too fancy. You don't want to overreach. You want it to have a broad appeal, but it also needs to be a kind of a big serving that you can serve to everybody. What do you go with?
That's a good question. Chili
Okay.
comes to mind.
Yeah.
What about like skirt steak sandwiches? Something like that.
I did not see that one coming.
Kind of like a banh mi, but I wouldn't call it that if I was going to serve it to a bunch of middle American farmer
Freedom,
or
Ohio,
firefighters
or wherever it is that Stipe works. You know what I've been messing around with lately, and because I can get my kids to actually eat it, is variations on enchiladas. Make a big ass tray of enchiladas pretty easily.
You know who's got a good enchilada recipe is our mutual friend Erica.
Oh, okay.
Should hit her up. I think she got it from Jennifer Lopez, actually.
Well,
like not directly, like out of some magazine or something. But you know what? I can make this like shrimp bake that is delightful, and I'll stand by my skirt steak sandwiches that are already brought up. I can mess around and make a prime rib. That's pretty easy. I know you do that too, holiday wise.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? Fucking Christmas?
Yeah. I make a lot of stuff, man. Like especially when my wife is working, I end up making dinner more often than not. So
I'm gonna want to hear more about this shrimp bake at a later time.
I stole it from the New York Times. I can just send you the recipe. The New York Times shit is pretty good generally, especially if you can get on like the 5 weeknight meals thing where all of the recipes are relatively easy. So I recommend that. In any case, that's it for this week's live chat. We're back tomorrow with Doing the Damn Thing, and then Friday for the Power Hour. Thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate the support. As for right now, we're done.